Welcome to I Was Egyptian. I am so glad you are here with us today. We are stepping into something that, honestly, it feels a little bit like a ghost story, but one that's backed up by some really hard science.
It really is. It's one of those investigations where the initial thread, it seems so thin, almost invisible. But when you start pulling on it, I mean, the entire tapestry of the 18th dynasty it unravels in your hands.
Yeah.
It's haunting, it's genuinely tragic, and it completely changes how you look at the most famous face in human history.
Yeah.
I am so excited to get into this one.
Me too. We have to say this first. Before we begin, the child and the family you are about to hear about are fictional, but everything that follows the archaeology, the texts, the research, that is real, and that is what makes this so hard to dismiss.
Exactly. And if this is your first time here, this is where we go deep into the mysteries that mainstream history leaves unanswered. So subscribe. That way you do not miss what comes next.
Today we are going to tell you the story of Ines. She's a 5-year-old girl living in Lisbon, Portugal. Now, like we said, the name is fictional, the family is fictional, but what she described, that is what brought us here today.
And to really get why this matters, you have to understand the context of her life. This isn't a child who's, growing up in the back room of the British Museum.
Not at all.
Right. The background here is crucial because we need to establish a control group, essentially. We need to know there wasn't an outside influence. Her father, he's a civil engineer, very structural, very logical.
Right.
And her mother works in accounting. These are, practical professions. Grounded in the here and now, they have no professional connection to ancient history.
None. There aren't textbooks on the Amarna period just lying around the living room. They aren't watching documentaries on the 18th dynasty over breakfast. It's a very standard modern household. But then the anomaly starts. Ines began drawing. And not just, random scribbles or the usual houses with the sun in the corner. She began drawing the same face over and over and over again for several weeks.
And this wasn't a stick figure, was it? The detail is what makes this so unsettling.
No, not at all. The features were incredibly specific. She was drawing a face with these high cheekbones, very elongated eyes, that almond shape that is so distinct.
The Amarna style.
Exactly. And maybe the strangest part, her mother eventually recognized the headgear. It wasn't a princess tiara or like a baseball cap. It was the blue crown of Egypt, the Khepres.
Wow. Okay, that is such a specific detail for a 5-year-old in Lisbon to just fixate on. The Khepres isn't even the most common crown people think of. Usually you see the Nimes headdress, right? The striped cloth one.
Yeah, the one on the mask.
Right. The blue crown was the war crown. It was likely made of leather or some kind of stiffened cloth covered in those distinct little circular discs. It implies a very specific royal function. For a child to replicate that without a reference model is, well, it's odd.
It is. It's very odd. And naturally, her parents were curious. I mean, you see your kid drawing the same intense face for 3 weeks, you're going to ask questions. So they asked her, they said, Nis, who is this person in the drawing?
And what did she say?
And Ines delivered a statement that it stops you in your tracks, she said. They put the wrong name on her. The face was never his.
Whoa, the face was never his.
Yeah.
That phrasing, that is incredibly precise.
It is the pronouns that get me. They put the wrong name on her. But the face was never his. She is identifying a gender swap.
She is.
She's identifying a theft of identity, and she is linking it to that specific crown.
It's fascinating because it implies a conflict.
Right.
A mismatch between the person and the label. It suggests that the history we see, the label on the museum display, is a lie that's covering up a different reality.
So we decided to find out if she could be right.
And to do that, we have to look at the object she seems to be describing. Or rather, the most famous face in the history of the ancient world.
The golden mask of Tutankhamun.
The icon. It's been in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo since 1923, though it travels now and then. It has been studied by hundreds of archaeologists. It has been reproduced millions of times on coffee mugs, T-shirts, textbooks.
Mouse pads. I think I had one in college.
Right. It's the face we think we know better than our own neighbors.
The boy king. The forgotten pharaoh. When you look at that mask, you see the striped Nimes headdress, the cobra and the vulture on the forehead, the beard of Osiris. It's the absolute epitome of pharaonic power.
It is, and the narrative surrounding it is very consistent. Tutankhamun died young, around 1323 BCE, maybe 18 or 19 years old. And because he died so suddenly, perhaps from an infection after a broken leg or malaria, or, a combination of genetic weaknesses, The story goes that his tomb was prepared in haste.
Right, a rush job.
A total rush job. And mainstream Egyptology generally agrees that the objects inside were repurposed.
Repurposed. That is such a polite way of saying recycled, isn't it? Or maybe pillaged from the royal storage closet.
Essentially, yes. The theory is that because the royal workshops were caught completely flat-footed by his sudden death, they took items originally made for other members of the royal family ancestors, or maybe those who had prepared tombs but never used them, and redirected them to furnish the burial of this king.
And that's the consensus. I mean, this isn't some fringe theory. It's the standard academic explanation for why the tomb is so small and jumbled.
Exactly. It's the accepted story.
But here's where we hit the problem. We accept repurposing as a logistical fact. We say, oh, they were in a rush, so they grabbed whatever was handy, but we rarely stop to ask, who were those other members? And what does it mean if the most famous face in the world, the mask itself, belongs to someone else?
That is the deepening question. If the mask was repurposed, it means the face we are looking at isn't Tutankhamun. And if it isn't him, who is it? To answer that, you have to place this in the context of the time. This was the end of the 18th dynasty. This was the Amarna period.
The era of Akhenaten, the heretic king.
Exactly. This was the most systematically erased period in Egyptian history. Akhenaten had moved the capital to the desert, the Akhetaten. He changed the religion to worship the Aten, the sun disk, to the exclusion of all the other gods. I mean, he upset the entire economic and religious order of the country.
For centuries.
Absolutely. So his successors, they didn't just move on. They tried to delete the past.
It wasn't just forgetting. This was active destruction.
Active and organized. It was a state-sponsored campaign. They dismantled temples stone by stone and used the blocks as filler for pylons in other cities. They defaced statues. They meticulously chiseled names out of granite. This modification, this erasing of identity, it wasn't an anomaly. It was, as we might say today, standard operating procedure.
Wow.
The goal was to pretend the Amarna period never happened, to stitch the history of Egypt back together, as if Akhenaten and his family had never existed.
So when Enos draws that picture and says the face was never his, she is tapping into a very real historical current. This wasn't a peaceful transition of power. It was a cover-up. The question is the mask itself a product of this erasure? Does it physically carry a modification on its face?
And to understand the gravity of that question, the real weight of it, we have to step away from the archaeology for a second and look at the theology. We need to talk about the Ren.
The name.
The name, but not name as we understand it, like a tag you wear at a conference or a label on a file system. In Egyptian theology, a person is a complex system. They believed you were made of 5 elements. You have the Khat, which is the physical body, the shadow, by your personality or soul that can travel, the Ka, which is your life force, and the Ren.
The Ren is a component of the self, like an organ.
It is as real as your heart. It is as necessary as your breath. It's a metaphysical limb. If you do not have a Ren, you do not exist. In the Egyptian worldview, to speak a name is to make it live, Seren, to cause the name to live.
So destroying a name, hacking it off a statue, or sanding it off a mask?
That was an attempt at permanent annihilation. It wasn't symbolic vandalism. It was metaphysical murder. Without a name, the Ka, your life force, has nowhere to attach. It's like unplugging the soul. If the name is gone, the person ceases to exist in the afterlife. They're cast into the outer darkness. Yeah. Annihilated.
There is that passage in the pyramid text. It's spell 446. Raymond Faulkner translated it. It says simply, your name lives, your Ka is with you.
Your name lives. The name is the existence. If the name dies, you die permanently. The pyramid texts are the oldest religious texts in the world, and they are obsessed with the preservation of the name.
And then you have the Book of the Dead, or, more accurately, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, chapter 125, the weighing of the heart.
The ultimate judgment. The deceased stands before Osiris and the 42 judges in the Hall of Truth. And to pass, you have to speak your own name. You have to declare who you are. The gods call you by name. Now, imagine you are standing there, and the name you are carrying is false, or corrupted, or belongs to someone else.
You can't pass.
It cannot pass. The devourer, a mint, is waiting right there to eat your heart. The end.
So if we look at the mask of Tutankhamun through this theological lens, if that mask has a new name carved over an old one,
then the horror of a modification becomes crystal clear. It's not just about saving gold or recycling materials. It means the mask presents the wrong identity to Osiris. The mask itself becomes the instrument of the original owner's erasure.
It becomes the weapon.
It becomes the weapon. The person who originally owned that mask, if their name was removed, was sent into the afterlife blind and mute, unable to claim their eternal spot.
That gives me chills. It transforms the mask from a beautiful object into a crime scene.
A metaphysical crime scene. And there are researchers who have been looking at this crime scene with a magnifying glass for years.
Let's talk about Nicholas Reeves.
Nicholas Reeves. He is a heavyweight in the field. He's a former curator at the British Museum. He worked at the Met in New York. This is not a guy who, makes wild guesses on the internet or chases aliens. He is known for methodical, dense, careful research. He looks at the things other people ignore.
In 2015, he published a paper. It was called The Gold Mask of Ankhkheperure. And he didn't mince words. He went straight for the jugular of the established narrative.
He really did. He laid out these specific physical arguments based on high-resolution photography and close-up examination of the mask, and he looked at the cartouche on the mask, that oval enclosure where the pharaoh's name is written.
Right, and what did he see? Because to the naked eye, standing there in the Cairo Museum, it just looks like gold.
He saw that the gold in the name enclosure shows signs of being worked differently than the rest of the mask. The hieroglyphs spelling Tutankhamun's name, Tutankhamun Heka they looked like they were stamped over something else. The background texture was different.
So it looked like a patch?
It suggests a reskinning is the term he used. A new layer of gold, or a major reworking of the existing surface, added over an old one to hide whatever was underneath.
So the name Tutankhamun was essentially pasted over the original owner.
Exactly. But that wasn't the only thing. He noticed the ears.
The ears are the smoking gun for so many people. I remember reading this and thinking, how did I never notice that?
Yeah.
The mask has double piercings in the earlobes.
Right. You might think, so what? Ancient Egyptians loved jewelry.
Yeah.
But in the 18th dynasty art, the gender rules were very, very specific. We have thousands of depictions. Wall paintings, statues, reliefs. Male pharaohs might have worn earrings as young boys up to puberty, but they were never depicted with them on their burial masks or as adult rulers.
Never.
Never. It just wasn't done. Kings were shown with smooth, unpierced earlobes in their eternal form. Double piercings, like the ones on the mask, were exclusively for female royalty.
Only women.
Only women. Nefertiti, her daughters. If you find a mask with double piercings in that era, you were looking at a woman or a female child. But Tutankhamun was around 19. He wasn't a child in the eyes of the court. He was a man, a king who had led armies, or at least was depicted leading them. He wouldn't be buried with the jewelry of a little girl.
So Reeves concludes the mask was likely made for a woman, specifically for someone named Neferneferuet.
Who was likely Nefertiti, ruling as sole pharaoh after her husband Akhenaten died. The theory is that Nefertiti didn't just disappear. She took a new name, Ankhkheperure, Neferneferuet, and ruled as a female king, similar to that Hatshepsut did earlier in the dynasty. She had the full royal titulary. She had the equipment being made for her burial.
So we have the physical evidence on the gold, the piercings, and the altered cartouche, but we also have the context of why this would happen. Why would they steal the queen's mask? And that brings us to Bob Breyer.
Bob Breyer, Mr. Mummy. He wrote the book The Murder of Tutankhamun. His work focuses heavily on the political chaos of the time. He talks about the power vacuum. You have Tutankhamun dying unexpectedly. He has no heir. The direct line of the 18th dynasty is ending. And circling the throne are these two powerful men, General Horemheb and the Vizier Ai.
The men who eventually became pharaohs themselves.
Exactly. And Horemheb is the key figure here. He's the man responsible for the big systematic erasure of the Amarna names later on. Breyer paints this picture of the velocity of the erasure. It was happening fast. Craftsmen were already engaged in this systematic identity removal. The country was trying to pivot back to orthodoxy, back to the old gods. Anything associated with Akhenaten and Nefertiti was politically radioactive.
So redirecting Neferneferuet's burial goods to Tutankhamun wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just, oops, we don't have a mask handy.
It was a practical political solution, a two-for-one deal. Tutankhamun dies suddenly. You have a tomb full of high-quality equipment made for a female predecessor, Nefertiti, whose name you want to erase anyway. She represents the heresy. It solves two problems at once. You bury the boy quickly to stabilize the throne, and you bury the memory of the heretic queen deep underground where no one will ever see it.
Speaking of burying memories, we have to mention the radar mystery. This was part of Reeves's theory too, right? This was a huge deal.
It was. Reeves proposed that because this was a rush job, Tutankhamun was actually buried in the outer section of a larger tomb. He believed there was a hidden chamber behind the north wall of the burial chamber, Nefertiti's actual tomb. He thought Tutankhamun was essentially squatting in the entryway of her final resting place.
And they did scans, I remember.
They did. This was massive news a few years ago. Initial thermal scans suggested anomalies, heat signatures that suggested a void, a hollow space behind the wall. Then radar scans were done. It looked like there was something there. Metal, organic material. The world held its breath. It felt like we were about to find the rest of the story.
And
then, crickets. Second to third scans were done by different teams, and they said, found nothing. The official line was that the geological signal was messy. The plaster on the wall interfered with the radar.
And the investigation was just halted.
Stopped cold. The Ministry of Antiquities decided not to drill a small hole to check. Now, that doesn't prove a conspiracy. It's good preservation practice not to drill holes in 3,000-year-old paintings based on inconclusive radar. But it certainly fits the pattern we're talking about. The closer you get to this specific erased history, the harder it becomes to see. The wall remains sealed.
But even without the hidden chamber, there are the things archaeology has found that it simply cannot explain away. We don't need a hidden room to see the evidence. It's staring us right in the face.
Exactly. Let's look at the hard science. In 2015, a team from the Egyptian Museum actually analyzed the mask with X-ray fluorescence, XRF.
Can you break that down? What is XRF?
Basically, X-ray fluorescence is a non-destructive way to figure out the elemental composition of a material. You shoot X-rays at the object, and the object emits a secondary X-ray signature that tells you exactly what atoms are in there, how much gold, how much silver, how much copper.
And since ancient gold refining wasn't standardized.
Right. Every batch of gold in the ancient world had a unique fingerprint, a unique alloy, depending on where it was mined and how it was smelted. If you make a mask all at once from the same batch of gold, the composition should be relatively uniform across the whole thing.
And what did they find?
They confirmed it. The gold in the face of the mask is one alloy. But the gold in the cartouche area, where the name is, has a different metallic composition, a different batch of gold.
A different batch of gold.
Which scientifically proves that the nameplate was worked on at a different time, or using different material than the face is attached to. Now, the official explanation is manufacturing complexity. They say, oh, it was just hard to make, so they used different gold patches.
That feels weak. Really weak.
It feels like a stretch, especially given the perfection of every other part of the object. The alternative is exactly what it looks like. It is a reskin, a patch job to hide the original name. They cut out the old name and soldered in a new one.
And it's not just the mask. If it were just the mask, okay, maybe you could argue it was a one-off, but there are the canopic coffinettes.
The miniature coffins. These are about 1.5 feet high, and they held the king's internal organs. The liver, lungs, stomach, intestine. They are beautiful, intricate things made of beaten gold and inlaid with glass and semi-precious stones. An Egyptologist named Christine Lilliquist analyzed them back in 1998, and she pointed out a glaring problem.
The face doesn't match.
The face doesn't match Tutankhamun. If you look at Tut's verified statues, the guardian statues in the tomb, the wooden busts, he has a very specific look. Full lips, a slightly receding chin, a certain softness to the features. Then you look at the faces on these canopic jars. They're thinner, the features are elongated, the nose is sharper. It is the classic Amarna style. It looks like Akhenaten or Nefertiti.
That's the same face Ines was drawing.
It is the face of the Amarna royalty. So the jars were repurposed too, and the inscriptions on them also show signs of being altered. The names were changed.
And then the mummy bands. This one feels like the final nail in the coffin to me. This isn't about artistic style or radar ghosts. This is text.
This is the smoking gun that Howard Carter found himself. When they unwrapped the mummy in the 1920s, they found these gold bands, they're like chased gold straps, wrapped directly on the body. Underneath all the linen wrappings, these bands were intended to hold the burial shroud in place.
So what was written on them?
Carter noted it in his journals, but it took years for the significance to really sink in. Some of the bands are inscribed with the name of Ankhkheperure Nefertiti.
Wait, so Tutankhamun is literally wrapped in someone else's name?
Literally, bound in it. He is wearing her identity directly against his skin. The outermost layer, the mask, was hers. The innermost layer, the bands on his body, was hers.
That is... wow. When you put it all together...
The convergence is just overwhelming. You have the mask with female piercings and altered gold. You have the canopic jars with the wrong face. You have the body wrapped in gold bands with the wrong name. It's not just one thing, it's the whole assemblage.
It's a total metaphysical overlay.
It is. It's not just borrowing a few cups and plates because you're short on time. It is a complete theological costume. They dressed him as her, or rather, they took her equipment, scratched out her name, but not everywhere, clearly, and put his name on top.
If this investigation is making you see Egypt differently, leave the word "before" in the comments right now. We read every single one.
And this brings us to the reflection. Because when you step back and look at this whole narrative, it completely changes the tragedy. We usually feel sorry for Tutankhamun, the boy who died so young.
But the real tragedy here might be the person underneath the gold. It wasn't just recycling wealth, it was the active erasure of a female pharaoh.
If the mask was hers, if the face with the blue crown that the little girl drew was hers, and the name was changed, then she was robbed of her eternal name.
She went to the weighing of the heart.
With no identity. Or worse, she went there, and the mask, her face, presented a false name. By the laws of their own faith, that is a condemnation. Imagine the soul of Nefertiti or Nefertaraten wandering in the afterlife, looking for her face, looking for her name, and finding that it has been given to the boy. Her Ka has nowhere to go.
It circles back to that hidden chamber idea for me. We always ask, who is in the tomb? We want to find the mummy. We want the treasure.
But that is the wrong question. We are obsessed with the physical discovery.
The real question is, whose name was taken to put him there?
Exactly. And if that face behind the wall is ever found, if we ever break through that plaster and find the queen, what name will be intact? Will we find the name that was stolen? Or will we just find a blank space?
That's the question that stays with you, the silence behind the gold.
If any part of this stayed with you, tell us which one in the comments. Books and sources are in the pinned comment. And if I Was Egyptian is showing you history from a different angle, make sure you are subscribed.
She said they put the wrong name on her. The face was never his. And the archaeology agrees.